Brian Davis, Home Improvement Man. Today we're going to replace a light. Now this process can work on any sort of light, interior, exterior, doesn't matter. But it's also important to remember that many lights vary to a degree. There are certain things that are the same, but other things can be somewhat different. So as we go through this light, you may notice if you're using this as a tutorial for your own lights that there's some variations, and I'll try and address the ones that are important and the ones that are not. So obviously the first thing that we need to do is we need to remove the old light. If you look around where it's mounted to the wall or to the ceiling, there should be a knob, or I mean, if you see a screw, it's obvious, but if you see a knob, more than likely this knob is going to turn and pull off so you can see what's behind it. If you're working on outside lights, you'll notice that there's often, they've been exposed to the elements, and so they're a little bit tighter, rustier, a little more corrosion. Now, as you take this off, with most lights, if you just leave it hanging, it's hanging off of the electrical wires that where it gets its power. And so you want to be a little careful with that. You don't want a lot of weight pulling on those wires. If you look here, you'll see that there are some of the in this case, orange wire nuts. And they don't want you don't want to put a lot of pressure on those. There's also, in this case, it's screwed into the bracket. And so I can put some weight on that because it's got, in this case, it's wrapped around fairly tightly. I don't want to leave it hanging for too long, and also recognize that I could be wrong. If this were to suddenly drop, well, that's on me. So I need to be very careful. Now, before I go any further, I want to make sure there's no electricity on here, and that's where these come in really handy. There shouldn't be. The light bulb was off. I know that the light works, so there should be no electricity. If I'm the nervous type, I'm going to check anyway, because there are certain wiring configurations that could have the power coming to the light before it gets to the switch. Now, in the modern house, you shouldn't see that because it's against code, but still, you never know who's been working on this house. Just because the house is newer, there's no guarantee that it's going to have been done correctly. So don't assume there's no power here if there's no light to the bulb. Also, this light, this fixture, could be faulty. There could be a blown bulb. There could be a bad wiring in here. So just because you don't see light to the bulb doesn't mean that there is no electricity in here. So when this light stays green and there's no tone, I know that there's no power. And so, as I had suspected, there's no power here. So the next step then is to remove it. The last thing I want to remove is that ground wire, the bare copper wire that is helping to hold this light up. So first thing I'm going to remove is the wire nuts holding all the black wires together, and then the wire nuts holding all the white wires together. Make sure that the wires are free that are attached to the light. And then lastly, making sure I hold the light, I'm going to remove the ground wire. That one's got a full ring, eye on it, which is why it's such a stable hole. The wire, or the light, comes free. Now this is a fairly standard setup. I've got a metal box, and I have the wires, and then this is how the light attaches to the wall. The new light has a different type of attachment piece, so I need to remove this as well. Alright, so the new light here has a couple features. We have, of course, the black and the white, which is where the power runs through. We have our ground, which is our safety. This one also has a little lanyard that we can use to hang off of the light once we get it in place. If you remember a few moments ago, hopefully you haven't forgotten, the weight of the light pulling on the electrical wires is not good, and so that's where this one comes into play. We can then hang the light off of that while we're doing our work and don't have to worry about the light pulling free. So I need to remove this piece in here because that's how we attach it to the wall. So this one's a little bit of a different setup. We have, let's clear it up. Okay, so this is what's going to mount to the box, and then this is how we attach it from the sides onto the light itself. So all I need to do is attach this to the light, to the box, making sure that this green screw here is on the outside because that's where the ground's going to go. Make sure that all the wires are on the outside so I can easily get to them once I put this in place. Now before I tighten it, I want to center it on the box. In this case, it doesn't matter so much. It's just a good habit to be into. Before you tighten everything down, make sure it's centered and square. This here is how the light attaches, and it's important then that this light be or this bracket be perfectly horizontal. And then I'm going to tighten the screw right in the center, right there, to hold it in place. Now the lanyard then moves into the slot, is put into the slot and pushed through. Like so. Now, if you've ever done any sort of light work, you know that that's the hardest part, is trying to hold this, before they started putting these lanyards on, trying to hold this up while you're trying to tighten all the wire nuts and make sure the wire nuts stay tight. With this setup here, I can go and take a sandwich or eat a sandwich and I can not have to worry about this light falling. Now, there's one other situation that's particular to this. Normally, you would take the ground wire, the bare copper, and you would attach it to the bare copper that's already here. This outlet box is metal. And the metal box attaches to the bracket attaches to the frame of the light here, and this ground wire is connected through metal to the frame. And so in this particular situation, it's not necessary to attach the copper wire to the copper wire. All I need to do is attach the house ground to the bracket, and then this light is grounded by the connection of the metal of the frame to the metal of the bracket to the metal of the box, all the way back into the ground. Most important part is that you make sure that the light is grounded. Now, if you are in an older house and there's only two wires, it'll be a black wire and a white wire with no bare copper ground. In that case, you can't ground it. Unless you have metal conduit, you have metal boxes, in which case oftentimes that metal box and conduit is the ground. So if you have any sort of metal work and you don't have a copper wire inside the wall in the house, make sure that you attach the copper wire of the light to the metallic part, something metallic inside the light. If you have plastic boxes, cloth wire, any other configuration, a lot of older house wiring doesn't have a ground, in which case you can't ground it out. Nothing you can do about that. But in this case, I am going to ground to the box and to the frame. All right, the next step is to attach the black wire of the light to the black wire of the house, and then the white wire likewise. When you're threading a stranded wire onto a solid wire, you want to take the stranded wire and have the end stick up a little bit higher than the solid wire as you screw it down, and that'll usually tighten it into place. Once it's in place, once I have the wire nut on, I'm going to give it a good tug, because it's really important it's seated securely. So, I mean, obviously I'm not going to try and pull it loose, but I do want to make sure it's got a good connection. There we go, it's tight. give it a tug, pull on all of it, make sure that it's all good. And it is. Do the same thing with the white wire. All right, as I start to put everything back together, I want to make sure that I'm not going to pinch any of the wires between the frame and the house, between the brackets. I don't want to expose any of the, take off, remove, scrape away any of the rubber coating on the wire. So being very careful, pushing as much of that wire back into the wall as I can. So now, got the threaded piece on the bracket, and then I just line the light up with that threaded piece and put it all back together. Again, I don't fully tighten it down until I have all the screws in place and lined up correctly. Sometimes if you go too tight, too quickly, you twist and bend things in places where it won't fully line up. There you go. Last thing you want to do, put a bulb in and test it out to make sure that you're all set before you move on. Thanks for watching. Hope that was helpful. Like, subscribe,